my walk with God has not been without question. It has been not without despair. It has not been without discomfort. It's had all those things. And in the opening chapter, I talk about how in one particular instance, I was disappointed in the way the Lord let things happen. But as you go through the book, you'll see that I look back over my shoulder and I see that it was the grace of God that he was working in my behalf, and I was not aware of it.
Well, thank you for watching another episode of the Jude 3 Project podcast. As always, I'm your host, Lisa Fields, the founder of the Jude 3 Project, and I'm so excited to bring you another special guest, Dr. W. Franklyn Richardson. Welcome, Dr. Richardson.
I'm delighted to be here to share with you.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk about your new book, a highly anticipated book. But before we get into that, tell our audience just a little bit about who you are.
Well, I'm the senior pastor of Grace Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, New York, and chairman of the Conference of National Black Churches, chairman of the National Action Network, and chairman of the board of Virginia Union University. That's a brief summary of my engagements, and I'm delighted to be sharing with you today.
Awesome. Well, you have a new book out, Witness to Grace. What was the motivation for you writing this book?
Well, I wrote the book because I've had a wonderful career. I've been pastoring for over 50 years, and I've been involved in so many, many things. And I had a surgery, and when I finished the surgery, it was a major surgery. I decided that I needed to catalog my journey and make it available for the next generation so that they could benefit from my experiences as I have benefited from those who preceded me. So it's kind of like I felt the book is paying it forward, an obligation to leave a reference to my pilgrimage. And not that I'm planning on leaving anytime soon, but I just wanted to make sure that statement would be continuous. And so I in assessing what my life had been like, the thing that most dominated in my life, my perception and my reflection was that I had been a recipient of the favor of God, and I was a recipient of God's grace. So that's what got the name of the book, Witness to Grace, Testimony of Favor. And it is out of that prism of looking at my life, I have written this book. And it is not just about faith. It's about multiple dimensions of my journey. It's about a young man starting out with essentially nothing but love, which is love is everything. But I started with very minimal resources and had obstacles along the way. But by God's grace, I am, as Paul says, I am what I am.
That's amazing. That's amazing. One of the major themes in your life is social justice.
Yeah.
What began the spark of passion for you around social justice?
Well, I guess it started in my early days in ministry. In 1967, I was a student at Virginia Union, and it was during the time when Martin Luther King was at the apex of his leadership in the nation for social justice and for civil rights. His engagement thrust the Black church in the forefront of the fight for social justice. And I consequently was a young man developing in ministry. I never met Martin Luther King, but the impact of his ministry and his leadership on the nation and on Black communities really shaped what young developing preachers were becoming. His view of a social gospel, a gospel that was relevant for the liberation and empowerment of African American people, was very appealing to me. And I think in my journey, his impact really had a lot to do with a focus. I guess it also had to do with coming to read the Bible through the prism of equality and social justice. And that's been enhanced not only by the Kingian philosophy, but by those that I had met on my journey at Virginia Union in undergrad. People like Y.T. Walker, who was a mentor to me, who was Martin Luther King's chief of staff, like that. People like that who Miles Jones and Jim Forbes, who were university pastors at the time, who had a penchant for social justice. So I think that all of us are the byproduct of the mentors that come in our lives. And if we're fortunate enough to get good mentors, it has a tremendous impact on the direction and the vitality of our contributions.
Mm. That's awesome. So you have a lot of experience with protesting. What advice would you give to my generation who around protesting and the justice work today?
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate your generation for picking up the mantle and for taking it into a new area and bringing fresh enthusiasm into it. No matter what you call it, it's not called today civil rights like Martin Luther King. It's today Black Lives Matter and other names. But you can go back before Martin King, and you got people fighting for social justice at Board of Education and Brown versus the Board of Education. You got people fighting for civil rights in Harriet Tubman and in Frederick Douglass. This has been a long journey. It's a long journey. We have not reached our destination. We have made great progress. And so these young people, like yourself, are picking up the mantle and carrying on the work. It is an intergenerational work. No one generation can solve or fix the consequences of racism. For 400 years, it has stricken our people. Its consequences still restrict the progress and prosperity of Black people in America. We still suffer from the presence of hate, the rise of national white nationalism, the rise of fresh hate. These anarchy groups focused on dividing us. So yes, I think your generation is on the right trail. I suggest when you ask me what do I recommend, I recommend that you keep the fight. Don't internalize your anger, because that will defeat you. Martin King always talked about peaceful protest. He always talked about acting in love, even for the person who is obstructing your progress. Because when you act in love, you don't allow yourself to be diminished, and you don't allow yourself to internalize hate. But hate in you will destroy you. So you have to be. I want to encourage young people to stay engaged, to keep up the fight. Don't internalize their anger or their hate, but understand that the cause is a cause that began before they were born, and it will be a cause that will be continuing after they are gone, because we won't. I don't see us wiping this out all the way for a while. But I think I'm encouraged by the progress. I'm not discouraged at all. I think we made great. We've had one step forward and a half step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's been that kind of thing. But when you put it all together, we have made great progress as a people in the fight for equality in a country that had its premise built on our inequality.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. As you talked about it, I was thinking about the people who are in the fight now, and they may be discouraged. How has you been in it a long time? How have you kept? How have you been able to keep going in the midst of discouragement?
Well, what has driven me is my commitment to ministry and my view of and my understanding of ministry. As I said to you earlier, I have viewed ministry as through the prism of social justice. I believe that Jesus was a social justice activist, and that God is on the side of the oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it is not a temporary thing. It's the highest form of worship to help bring the world in line with what I understand Christ and God to want the world to be. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's a calling, it's a commitment. There's no such thing as quitting. We get tired, but we don't quit. We don't quit. We go to the end. We keep on going. We keep fighting as long as we can fight. Mm-hmm. Somebody else picks up the fight. So it's not, I have not been discouraged. I continue to be, I've won, I've lost in my life, but I've never been defeated.
That's powerful. Thank you for that. I think that's encouraging to those who are listening. As I was starting to read through your book, one of the things that stuck out to me was the first chapter. You titled it "Mad at God," and I love that you included that because you talked about a family member saying you can't question God, and I think that's a lot of young people really get frustrated by. Some people in the church who told us you're not allowed to question God. And why did you think that was important to make the first chapter in your book?
Well, because that chapter quickly shows people that I'm not projecting some kind of goody two-shoes, righteous perfection. But I'm a human being who has emotion and who, even as a pastor, has been disappointed and been pushed to moments of challenge. And so I wanted to share that. I wanted to break the ground at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And by sharing the fact that my walk with God has not been without question, it has been not without despair, it has not been without discomfort, it's had all those things. And in the opening chapter, I talk about how in one particular instance, I was disappointed in the way the Lord let things happen. But as you go through the book, you'll see that I look back over my shoulder and I see that it was the grace of God that he was working in my behalf, and I was not aware of it. But I was, at that moment, I was disappointed. And the reason why I talked about not being mad with God, my grandmother had always told me my whole life, don't, you never question God. You never question God. And she had authentic faith. But what I have discovered is that when you have a question and you have a frustration, the only one who can answer it is God. And God is able to, we don't have to protect God and we don't have to hide God from our questions. God is big enough to handle our questions, to handle our doubts, and to speak to our needs.
Yes, that's great. And that's how we deepen our relationship with him, because he already knows our questions. And I think about in relationships, your relationships thrive when you're able to ask questions of the person you're in relationship with, and it deepens the relationship. So I'm so glad you included that in your book. One other thing I know that you are passionate about is HBCUs. Why are you so passionate about historically Black colleges and universities?
Well, first of all, I don't know if they weren't for historically Black colleges, and Virginia Union in particular, my life would be devastatingly different from what it is today. And I'll tell you quickly what that is, what I mean when I say that. I went to Philadelphia. I grew up in Philadelphia in inner city schools, went to West Philadelphia High School. When I got to the 10th grade, I was anticipating wanting to be a doctor. And I went to my counselor, and my counselor told me that I wasn't college material. And the truth is that he probably was right, because they had not prepared me to be college material. Back then, we had social promotion. If you didn't get any trouble, you was a good fella, you automatically get passed on to the next grade. Whether you had developed the competencies that the grade should have given you wasn't important. So when he told me that, I was devastated. But I went on, and I wasn't going to accept it. I went on to West Philadelphia Community College. And when I got to the community college, I flunked out the first year. And as I was trying to go forward in my ministry, my pastor told me, I told him I wanted to be a pastor and a minister, and he affirmed it. And I told him I had flunked out of college. So he said, no, you go on and apply at Virginia Union University.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. And Virginia Union accepted me on a conditional matriculation because I could not read. While I had graduated from high school, I had not developed reading skills.
Mm.
And so Virginia Union said, we'll put you in a year remediation on conditional matriculation. And if you do well that year, you can stay.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, I did, and went on and graduated from Virginia Union, graduated from Yale, and earned a doctor's degree at United Theological Seminary, and then went around the world and traveled. And 35 years later, the kid who had a conditional matriculation is now the chairman of the board of trustees of Virginia Union, and every degree is signed with my signature on it. That's awesome. So it's the grace of God. Mm-hmm. And so I owe so much to Virginia Union University. Not only the fact that they let me matriculate, but the fact that it was the first time I saw a Black doctor or a Black teacher in my life was when I got to Virginia Union. Mm-hmm. I saw Black people in charge of everything. Mm-hmm. Professors, the president, the board of trustees. All of that was reaffirming. It was good for my self-esteem. Mm-hmm. And it motivated me. And I tell you that being Black in America brings with it a likelihood of a diminished self-esteem for Black people. Mm-hmm. And HBCUs do a real good job, even today, in reinforcing damaged self-esteem caused by racism in the United States of America. It helps young Black students to overcome, and sometimes they're not even aware that they have the self-esteem deficiency, and they're not even aware that the environment of the historically Black college is helping them to get rid of it. And so that's why I think HBCUs are very critical. The testimony is that we graduate more Blacks than white schools do. White schools enroll more Blacks, but they don't graduate more Blacks. We do that. And outstanding Americans, African Americans, and much of the communities of our city have been the products of HBCUs. And there's nothing that in this book on Monday, this coming Monday, on Cyber Monday, we're upping the sales of the book. We reduced the price, and I have dedicated and am donating 10% of all the proceeds to historically Black colleges through the UNCF and Virginia Union University. So there's nothing I can say. All I can do is say thank you. I have a chapter in my book that says, how do you say thank you for these institutions that have made it possible for you to endure and to overcome and to achieve in the face of systemic racism for 400 years.
That's awesome. And I've witnessed its power myself. My brother, my youngest brother in high school, some of his teachers and counselors were giving him not so favorable news about college. And he enrolled at Benedict in South Carolina, and he excelled. I mean, he was killing it when he got there, and he graduated. And I saw how his confidence just shot through the roof. And how it really propelled him into all the things he wants to do now. Now he's planning on going to law school. And so if it had not been for Benedict, I don't think he would have been able to excel in that way. So I think what you're sharing is powerful, and I've witnessed it with my own eyes. How can we support, how can our community do a better job of supporting HBCUs?
Well,
what's some advice you would give?
First of all, we must respond to the negative rhetoric that people are putting forward that we don't need HBCUs anymore. That's the first thing we have to stop. The statistics say we do need HBCUs. The statistics say that They serve a critical role in the formation of African American leadership and competencies. So the first thing is we must attack that rhetoric that diminishes. Then secondly, we have got to support historically Black colleges with our money, our time, and our students. We have to encourage our students to go to those institutions. We cannot afford at this moment in our history for the continual dissolve of HBCUs. So we've got to financially support. Too many of us who graduate from HBCUs think that we are satisfied. We've met our obligation because we've paid our tuition. When in fact, your tuition only pays a portion of your education. Your education is paid for by monies that grandma sends and the grandmothers of the world and corporations and churches give to these schools to keep them alive. And once you graduate, you have an obligation to pay back, to pay forward. Not to walk away and say, I got a degree and I paid for it. You never paid for your degree. Your tuition was only a contribution to the cost of your education. We have got to raise in our communities the expectation that we're going to support our colleges and universities.
That's helpful. Thank you for sharing. What was the most challenging chapter for you to write in this book?
I think the thing I was most challenged by was the epilogue. And the epilogue was a result of, I had finished the book and I was ready for it to be released, and the pandemic had come and shut down publishers and distribution networks. So the book was delayed. And in the delay, I began to reflect on the pandemic and on Black Lives Matter. And so I decided that I would raise the question of God's grace in light of the pandemic. And my fundamental question was, could it be that the pandemic was an exercise of God's grace? In the pandemic, was this God's way of readjusting or reclaiming his creation? Was it that God was calling us to reset? That maybe, is it possible that the corruption and the unequal distribution of wealth, the misuse of the climate, the misuse of race and peoples, the separation of nations, could it be that this DNA of our humanity was set in such a place that when things got so bad, when we became so corrupt, when things became so out of balance, that they would kick in this virus that would make us relook at ourselves and re-examine ourselves and recognize our vulnerability and recognize that the walls that separate people, whether they are nations, whether they are class or race, are all fake walls. They're presented by us. They're irrelevant, and they're an imagination. They're social constructions. And so the book I was challenged by that chapter because I was pushed to look at what I had said about grace as being in all my life and how was grace functioning even in the pandemic, because we saw in the pandemic revelations of things we had not considered. We saw heights of compassion we had never seen. We saw people who were willing to give their lives to save other people. We saw institutions rise up and start feeding the hungry. We saw a lot of positive things in the midst of this serious situation. We saw healthcare workers and doctors and nurses put themselves on the line. We saw all kinds of expression as we watched the procession of our loved ones go to the cemetery and couldn't get in cemeteries for 3 weeks. All of those things shaped our focus. And the question becomes, for us, having come through the pandemic or going through, and when we get to the end, will we just simply start over, or will we start again?
Mm.
That will be the question we have to ask. Will we continue to be like we were, or will there be a fresh and new beginning as we go into the frontier of the future?
That's a really great question. I'm looking forward to see how people answer that in the coming days. What was the easiest or most enjoyable chapter for you to write?
I think the early days, the occasion to reflect when I was a child, my parents, to visit both my parents have gone to the Silent City, and I kind of enjoyed revisiting what it was like growing up with challenges, with their faithful escort of faith and love. I had a great chance of, giving me a chance to revisit the early formations of my life, the things that affected me that maybe not until I wrote the book that I really sat down and think about those, how they impacted on who I am today. So that was a really refreshing point of the book, to be able to go back to my earliest years, visit my youngest recollections, and move from there to revisit the journey that I've been on for the last several years.
That's awesome. As we bring this interview to a close, is there anything about the book that we haven't discussed that you want our audience to know that you think would be pertinent information?
Well, I think that there's several aspects to the book. First of all, it's available to people who are finding themselves in the early stages of their careers. I also talk about how a global awakening. That's something I talk about. I talk about my role with social justice and the many struggles I've had in the fight for freedom and equality. I talk about the challenges of going to college, the political challenges that came within my denomination. So it's a book not just for pastors, but it's a book for people who want an insight into how I have seen and recognize the grace of God functioning in my life. And it has been wonderful. I served on corporate boards, and my involvement on corporate boards has been to empower people in our communities, to make sure that these boards who receive our money don't just get our money, but give us opportunity to climb the C-suites of corporations and to be hired, make sure that to challenge them. So it's been a wonderful journey. And I think the book is broadly appealing because it speaks of a lot of issues, and it's in the language of celebration.
That's awesome. And I encourage you all to get Witness to Grace, and make sure you get it this Monday, because this Monday, as you mentioned, Dr. Richardson, 10% of the proceeds will be going back to Virginia Union. Am I correct?
Virginia Union and historic and UN. So it's Virginia Union and HBCUs. It's not just Virginia Union. So
Okay.
We're sharing half of the proceeds to Virginia Union and half to UNCF.
That's awesome. So make sure you could get the book and get the resource, and also support HBCUs at the same time. And that's an amazing thing.
It's a one-day reduction in costs for Cyber Monday. So normally the book sells for $27. It's on sale for $16.95 on Monday.
Mm-hmm. And that's at witnesstograce.com.
No, you can get it at Amazon.
Amazon, I'm sorry.
Yeah. One buy on Amazon, because we also want to make it a bestseller, so it's got to be counted.
So definitely go to Amazon and get Witness to Grace. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your story with us, and also this book. And just this has been a great interview. It's been a joy to talk to you. Thank you all for watching another episode of the Jude 3 Project podcast. Remember, you can get all our resources or donate at jude3project.org. And remember, here at the Jude 3 Project, we're helping you to know what you believe and why you believe it. God bless.